You can look all you want, but these cars cost more than your yearly rent. Ethan Walker said it loud enough for the entire showroom to hear, and the laughter that followed rolled across the polished marble floor like breaking glass inside the Beverly Hills dealership, every head turning toward the tall black man standing beside a midnight blue Rolls-Royce Spectre with one hand resting lightly on the door handle as if he belonged there more than the people selling it. Darius Coleman didn't react immediately. He just stood there in a plain black hoodie, dark jeans, and worn white sneakers while sunlight poured through the 40-foot showroom windows and bounced off chrome rims worth more than most people's mortgages. Around him, luxury hung in the air like perfume. Italian leather, fresh espresso, soft jazz hidden behind the hum of money. The kind of place where wealthy people spoke quietly because they assumed power already belonged to them. Ethan smirked and straightened his gray designer suit. Photos are free, he added while another salesman chuckled near the Ferrari display. Buying isn't. A white couple near the Lamborghini section laughed awkwardly before pretending not to stare. Darius slowly removed his hand from the Rolls-Royce door and looked around the showroom without embarrassment, without anger, almost like he was studying something far more valuable than the vehicles themselves. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Darius. At exactly 2:14 p.m., the dealership floor buzzed with Saturday energy. Salesmen floated through the room hunting commissions, while wealthy customers sipped sparkling water beneath chandeliers imported from Milan. Yet the tension around Darius had already changed the atmosphere. It wasn't loud yet. It was subtle, a tightening in the room. The kind that happens when people silently decide someone doesn't belong. Ethan stepped closer, eyes moving over Darius's hoodie again. You here to waste time, he said, or are you actually shopping? Darius finally looked at him directly. Calm. Steady. I'm looking. Ethan laughed again. At what? Inspiration? Another salesman snorted. Naomi Brooks, the youngest receptionist in the building, looked up from the front desk immediately. She couldn't have been older than 26. Her expression shifted the second she saw Ethan circling Darius like prey. She had seen this tone before. The fake smile. The polite cruelty wrapped in customer service language. Darius turned his attention back toward the black Rolls-Royce. His reflection stretched across the flawless paint. Beautiful craftsmanship, he said quietly. Ethan folded his arms. Yeah, most people just admire them from a distance. The jab landed exactly how Ethan intended it to. Nearby customers heard it. One older man shook his head slightly, but stayed silent. Another customer pulled out his phone for a second before lowering it again. Darius remained motionless. That calmness irritated Ethan even more because men like Ethan understood arguments. They understood yelling. But composure? That felt dangerous. You know, Ethan continued, lowering his voice just enough to sound fake friendly. The Toyota dealership is about 3 miles east. Probably more your speed. Naomi's eyes widened. The comment was quiet, but not quiet enough. Darius slowly turned toward him. My speed. Ethan smiled thinly. You seem practical. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then Darius nodded once as if mentally recording every word. 20 years earlier, when Darius was 19, his mother had brought him into a dealership almost identical to this one after saving for months to buy her first luxury car. A salesman looked directly at her and asked if she was lost. Darius still remembered the silence in her face during the drive home. Not anger, not tears, just humiliation heavy enough to fill the car. That memory never left him. It followed him through college, through failed business loans, through 18-hour workdays building one of the largest logistics companies on the West Coast. And now here he was again. Same city, same polished floors, same assumptions, different bank account. A young white salesman approached a wealthy customer who had entered after Darius and immediately offered champagne. Nobody had offered Darius water. Nobody had offered him a brochure. Ethan noticed Naomi watching and gave her a sharp look. Don't, he muttered under his breath. But Naomi couldn't stop staring at Darius because unlike everyone else in the room, he didn't look embarrassed. He looked observant, like a man gathering evidence instead of emotions. Darius walked slowly toward a pearl-white Bentley Flying Spur while Ethan followed beside him with growing irritation. Look, Ethan said, These appointments are usually scheduled in advance. Darius glanced at the Bentley interior. Interesting. Ethan smirked again. You got an appointment? Maybe. With who? Darius looked at him. That important? Ethan's smile faded for half a second. Then he laughed louder than before. Buddy, nobody spends $500,000 dressed like that. The room heard it. Naomi heard it. The customers heard it. Even the finance manager looked up from his office. Darius slipped his hands into his hoodie pockets and slowly scanned the showroom one more time. Not the cars. The people. The reactions. The fear hidden behind luxury. Then he asked quietly, "So this is how your dealership treats potential clients?" Ethan shrugged carelessly. Potential is the key word. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music overhead. And somewhere deep beneath the polished smiles and expensive lighting, the entire dealership had already started drifting toward a mistake none of them were prepared to survive. The showroom air felt colder after Ethan said it. Not because the temperature changed, but because everyone inside had silently chosen a side without saying a word. Darius Coleman continued walking past the Bentley section with the same calm pace, his sneakers barely making noise against the marble floor while reflections of million-dollar vehicles slid across the black fabric of his hoodie. The dealership stretched nearly 30,000 square feet beneath towering glass walls and suspended chrome lighting that made every car look untouchable, almost sacred. But Darius was not looking at horsepower anymore. He was looking at behavior. Every glance, every hesitation, every calculated smile. He noticed how salesmen approached white customers within seconds while pretending not to see him standing beside six-figure vehicles. He noticed how one employee quietly moved a bottle of imported sparkling water away from his reach while offering another tray to a white man wearing golf clothes and loafers. He noticed everything. And somehow that made Ethan more uncomfortable than if Darius had argued back. "Sir," another salesman finally said with forced politeness as Darius paused beside a matte black Aston Martin. "These models are usually shown by appointment only." Darius nodded slightly. "I understand." The salesman looked surprised by the calm answer. Ethan leaned against a nearby desk, folding his arms with the confidence of a man who believed expensive buildings protected him from consequences. "Translation," Ethan called out. "You are not supposed to touch anything." A few customers laughed quietly again. Naomi Brooks stopped typing at the reception desk. The tension in the showroom was becoming impossible to ignore now. Even the music overhead suddenly felt too soft for the room. Darius slowly circled the Aston Martin with one hand in his pocket. "Interesting customer service strategy," he said calmly. Ethan smirked. "Works pretty well, actually." Darius glanced toward him. "Does it?" Ethan took a step closer. "Look around. This place does 8 figures every quarter. I think we know our clientele." That word lingered in the air. Clientele. Carefully chosen. Carefully aimed. Darius looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Rodeo Drive, where sunlight flashed across passing Ferraris and Range Rovers outside. Los Angeles had always been a city obsessed with appearance. The right watch. The right car. The right skin in the right neighborhood. He learned that lesson before he was old enough to drive. At 17, Darius worked part-time washing delivery trucks after school while his mother cleaned office buildings overnight in South Central. One afternoon, she brought him to a luxury dealership just to look at cars after he got accepted into college. He still remembered how security followed them through the showroom without speaking. He remembered his mother pretending not to notice. He remembered promising himself that one day nobody would ever make her feel small again. Now, decades later, standing inside another luxury dealership worth tens of millions of dollars, the same energy wrapped itself around the room like smoke. Different suits. Same prejudice. Naomi quietly opened the dealership appointment system on her tablet. She was not trying to interfere. Not yet. But something about Darius felt wrong in the best possible way. Men who were pretending usually talked too much. They overcompensated. They flashed watches or shouted about money. Darius did none of that. He looked completely comfortable standing in silence while being underestimated. That bothered her. She typed slowly into the system search bar. "Coleman." Instantly a profile appeared. "Executive appointment request. Corporate acquisition discussion. Priority level clearance." Naomi blinked hard and looked back toward Darius. Her pulse quickened. Ethan was still talking. "Honestly," he said while laughing toward another salesman, People come in here all the time pretending they are buyers. Last week some guy asked if we took monthly payments on a McLaren. More laughter. Darius remained still beside the Aston Martin. And you think I am pretending? Ethan shrugged. If the shoe fits. Naomi stood up immediately. Ethan, she said carefully, trying to keep her voice low. I think there might be some confusion here. Ethan barely looked at her. There is no confusion. No. Seriously, Naomi continued quietly. His name is actually in the system. Ethan finally turned. What? Naomi swallowed nervously. Darius Coleman. There is an executive appointment request attached to corporate review. Ethan stared at her for 1 second before laughing again. That means nothing. Anybody can submit an online request. The nearby salesman nodded quickly. Nobody wanted to challenge him publicly. Naomi looked back at the tablet screen. There it was again. Priority clearance. Internal authorization code. Someone important had entered this system personally. Darius slowly turned toward Naomi for the first time. Their eyes met briefly. He gave the smallest nod imaginable. Not arrogance. Not fear. Recognition. As if he already knew exactly who in the room still had a conscience. Ethan noticed the exchange immediately. Naomi, he said sharply, why do not you get back to work and let actual salespeople handle the showroom? Her face tightened. I am just saying maybe we should verify before making assumptions. Ethan laughed coldly. I already verified enough. Then he looked directly at Darius again. People like you always think money can buy respect. Silence hit the room instantly. Even the customers stopped pretending not to listen. Darius stared at Ethan for several long seconds, his expression unreadable beneath the bright showroom lights. Then he spoke quietly. No, Ethan smirked. No what? Darius slipped both hands into his hoodie pockets and looked around the dealership one more time. Respect is free, he said calmly. That is why it is so expensive when people fail to give it. Nobody laughed this time. The silence after Darius spoke felt heavier than the marble beneath everyone's feet. Even the soft jazz overhead suddenly sounded distant, swallowed by the tension spreading through the Beverly Hills showroom like smoke under a locked door. Ethan Walker forced a laugh, but it landed weak this time. That sounded deep, he said, straightening his cufflinks. Did you rehearse that in the parking lot? A couple near the Porsche section exchanged uncomfortable glances. Naomi Brooks remained frozen behind the reception desk, staring at the appointment file glowing on her tablet screen. Priority level clearance. Internal executive notation. Whatever this meeting really was, it was far above her pay grade. But Ethan kept digging deeper with every sentence. Darius turned calmly toward a silver Mercedes Maybach positioned beneath a rotating spotlight. The car gleamed like liquid metal under the showroom lights, flawless and silent. He slowly examined the stitching along the interior through the tinted glass, while Ethan followed a few steps behind him like a man determined to win an argument nobody else was having. You know what the funny part is? Ethan asked loudly. People always walk in here pretending confidence is enough. Like if they act rich long enough, maybe somebody will believe it. One salesman laughed harder than necessary. Another shook his head while pretending to organize paperwork. Nobody challenged Ethan because everyone in the showroom understood the unspoken rules. The expensive suits protected each other. Darius lightly touched the door handle of the Maybach. Immediately, a salesman named Trevor stepped forward holding a microfiber cloth. Without saying a word, he wiped the chrome handle after Darius moved his hand away. The motion was subtle, quick enough to deny if questioned. But everyone nearby saw it happen. Naomi's stomach tightened instantly. Darius noticed too. His eyes dropped briefly to the cloth in Trevor's hand before returning to the vehicle. He still did not raise his voice. That calmness was becoming unbearable for Ethan because it made every insult feel uglier in the silence afterward. Careful, Trevor joked awkwardly. Fingerprints kill the shine. Ethan smirked immediately. Actually, he added, that one is already sold. Owner picks it up Monday. Darius nodded slowly. Lucky owner. Ethan leaned closer. Successful people tend to enjoy successful things. The words carried that same carefully polished poison rich people used when they wanted prejudice to sound sophisticated. Near the entrance, a middle-aged black couple had quietly stopped walking and started listening. The husband folded his arms while the wife stared directly at Ethan with growing disbelief. Meanwhile, another customer, a white man in a navy golf shirt, walked into the showroom, and within seconds Trevor offered him bottled water and a leather catalog with a smile. The contrast hit the room like a spotlight. Darius watched the interaction carefully. "Interesting," he said quietly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "Your standards change very quickly depending on who walks through the door." Trevor shifted uncomfortably while Ethan chuckled again. "No," Ethan replied smoothly. "We just know how to identify serious buyers." Darius slowly turned toward him. "And how exactly do you do that?" Ethan's smile tightened. "Experience." The answer hung there long enough for everyone to understand what he actually meant. Naomi looked down at her tablet again, then back toward Darius. She knew she should stay quiet. This dealership ran on commissions and hierarchy. Ethan controlled half the floor staff. But every second this continued felt worse than the second before. Darius began walking toward the center platform where the newest Rolls-Royce Phantom sat beneath white overhead lights like a crown jewel. A velvet rope surrounded the vehicle. Ethan quickly stepped in front of him before he reached it. "That one is off limits," he said firmly. Darius stopped. "To who?" Ethan folded his hands in front of him. "To people without appointments." Naomi finally spoke louder this time. "He does have one." Ethan turned sharply toward her. "Naomi." She swallowed hard, but continued anyway. "The system says executive review authorization." Ethan walked toward the front desk, irritation flashing across his face for the first time. "You are a receptionist," he said quietly through clenched teeth. "Not corporate security." Naomi looked shaken but did not back down completely. "I just think maybe we should verify before assuming things." Ethan laughed coldly. "Assuming?" He gestured toward Darius standing calmly beside the Phantom display. "Look at him." The words echoed harder than he intended because now the entire showroom had gone almost silent. The black couple near the entrance exchanged looks again. Trevor stopped pretending to organize papers. Even the finance manager was watching from behind his office glass now. Darius stood perfectly still under the white showroom lights, hoodie plain, sneakers worn, expression unreadable. Ethan shook his head slowly. "This is Beverly Hills," he said. "Not some social experiment." Darius glanced around the room again. The luxury watches, the polished shoes, the employees pretending professionalism while humiliation unfolded in front of customers. He had seen rooms like this his entire life. Rooms where people smiled while quietly deciding your value before you ever opened your mouth. 24 years earlier, during his first sales pitch to investors in downtown Los Angeles, a man interrupted him halfway through the meeting and asked whose assistant he was. Darius remembered the laughter around that conference table. He also remembered buying the company that rejected him 11 years later. The memory returned now like a slow pulse beneath his calm expression. Ethan stepped closer to the phantom rope barrier. "You know what?" he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I think it is time for you to leave before this becomes embarrassing." Darius finally looked directly at him again. Calm. Steady. Unmoved. "Too late," he said quietly. "It already is." The words settled over the showroom like smoke after a fire alarm. "Too late. It already is." Nobody moved for a moment after Darius said it. The bright luxury dealership suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves understood something ugly had crossed the line. Ethan Walker forced another smile, but confidence was beginning to crack around the edges now. "You know what your problem is?" he asked while stepping closer to the velvet rope around the Rolls-Royce Phantom. "You think acting calm makes you important." Darius kept his eyes on him. "No," he answered quietly. "I think your behavior makes you obvious." A low murmur moved through the customers nearby. The black couple near the entrance had stopped pretending to browse entirely now. The husband folded his arms tighter while his wife shook her head slowly in disbelief. Across the showroom, Trevor avoided eye contact completely, suddenly fascinated by paperwork that did not need organizing. Naomi Brooks stared down at her tablet again, pulse racing harder with every second. She reopened the executive profile attached to Darius Coleman's name. This time she noticed an internal note she missed before. Fleet acquisition discussion. Multi-state corporate account review. Potential 8-figure partnership. Her stomach dropped instantly. Ethan was not humiliating a random customer. He was humiliating someone connected to a deal large enough to change the entire dealership's yearly numbers. Naomi looked back toward Darius standing beneath the white showroom lights with his hoodie and worn sneakers, while every person in the building continued judging him by appearance alone. The disconnect felt surreal now. "Ethan," she said carefully again. I really think you should stop for a second and verify this. Ethan did not even turn around. No, but the file says corporate acquisition review. Ethan laughed sharply. And I could put my name into the White House visitor log right now. That does not make me president. A few nervous laughs escaped from nearby employees, but nobody sounded comfortable anymore. Darius slowly stepped away from the phantom display and walked toward the reception area with the same controlled pace that had unsettled the room from the beginning. He was not angry. That was the disturbing part. His calmness felt deliberate now, almost surgical, like every insult was being cataloged somewhere behind his eyes. Naomi swallowed hard as he approached the desk. "Sir," she said softly, "I apologize for this." Ethan immediately stepped between them. "Do not apologize for doing your job." Naomi looked directly at him now. "This is not our job." Silence snapped through the showroom again. Ethan stared at her with visible irritation. "Excuse me." Naomi took a breath. "Our job is to sell cars, not profile people." Several employees looked down instantly. One customer quietly whispered, "Finally," under his breath. Ethan's face tightened. "Naomi, you are way out of line." "No," she replied nervously but firmly. "I think this entire situation is out of line." Darius remained silent beside the desk, while Naomi turned the tablet screen slightly toward Ethan. "Look at the authorization level attached to his appointment." Ethan glanced down briefly before scoffing. "Probably fake." Naomi shook her head immediately. "It is internal access. Someone from corporate entered this manually." For the first time since Darius entered the showroom, uncertainty flickered across Ethan's face. Small, fast, but visible. He recovered quickly enough to keep his posture straight, though the room had already noticed. Darius watched the shift carefully without saying a word. "Even if that is true," Ethan said coldly, "serious clients do not walk in dressed like that." The sentence landed harder than he intended because now it sounded desperate instead of confident. Naomi looked stunned. "You hear yourself right now?" Ethan pointed toward Darius without taking his eyes off Naomi. "This is Beverly Hills luxury retail. Appearances matter." Darius finally spoke again, his voice calm enough to cut through the tension without effort. "That is the problem." Ethan looked at him sharply. Darius glanced around the showroom. "You built an entire business around appearances and forgot how to recognize value." Nobody interrupted him. Even the customers stayed still. The room had started shifting now, slowly but unmistakably. People were no longer watching Darius like he was the problem. They were watching Ethan. Naomi looked back at the tablet once more, then quietly opened another section of the profile. Her eyes widened immediately. There it was. Corporate Mobility Expansion Initiative. 20 executive vehicles under review. Estimated contract value listed beneath it. $8.4 million. Naomi nearly stopped breathing. Ethan was standing inches away from destroying the biggest deal this dealership had seen all year. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. Ethan heard it. "What now?" Naomi looked up slowly. Fear and disbelief crossed her face at the same time. "You need to stop talking," she said quietly. Ethan laughed once more, but this time the sound was hollow. "Why? Is he secretly a billionaire?" Darius looked directly at him. "Would it change how you treated me?" Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out immediately. That hesitation changed the room more than shouting ever could. Customers exchanged glances. Trevor slowly backed away toward the finance office. The black couple near the entrance nodded slightly to themselves like they had seen this exact moment happen 100 times before in different buildings with different faces. Naomi finally stepped out from behind the reception desk completely and stood beside Darius instead of behind Ethan. The movement was small, but everyone noticed it. Ethan noticed it most of all. "You are making a mistake," he warned her quietly. Naomi shook her head. "No." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept going anyway. "I think the mistake already happened the second he walked through the door." The showroom no longer felt luxurious. It felt exposed. Every polished surface, every glass wall, every six-figure vehicle suddenly reflected something uglier than wealth. Ethan Walker stood rigid near the Rolls-Royce platform, while Naomi Brooks remained beside Darius Coleman, the tablet still trembling slightly in her hands. Customers had stopped pretending to browse entirely now. Phones were beginning to appear quietly above purses and jacket pockets. Nobody announced they were recording. They did not need to. The tension itself demanded witnesses. Ethan looked around the room and realized too late that control was slipping away from him. "Everybody calm down," he said with a forced laugh that sounded thinner by the second. "This guy walks in dressed like he slept in his car, and suddenly I am the villain?" The words hit the showroom hard. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. The black couple near the entrance exchanged a look filled with the kind of exhaustion that comes from hearing the same insult in 100 different forms over a lifetime. Darius remained perfectly still beneath the white showroom lights. "Interesting," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "No, what is interesting is how people expect respect without earning it." Darius looked directly at him. "And what exactly did you need from me before deciding I deserved basic respect?" Ethan opened his mouth immediately, then stopped. The silence afterward was sharper than shouting. Trevor suddenly stepped away toward the back office as if distance could protect him from what was unfolding. Naomi slowly lowered the tablet onto the front desk. "Ethan," she said carefully, "you need to listen to yourself right now." But Ethan was already spiraling deeper into his own arrogance. "I know exactly what I am saying," he snapped. "I built my numbers in this dealership by knowing who is serious and who is not." Darius nodded once. "And what did you see when you looked at me?" Ethan shrugged coldly. "Someone pretending to belong." The room tightened again. Darius lowered his eyes briefly toward the marble floor as if something old had suddenly returned to him. 26 years earlier, when he was 16 years old, his mother had taken him to a luxury dealership after church because she wanted to celebrate his acceptance into a private business academy. She wore her best blue dress. He wore the only blazer they could afford. A salesman followed them through the showroom for 20 minutes before finally asking if they needed directions to the bus stop outside. Darius still remembered the way his mother smiled politely instead of reacting. He remembered how quiet she became during the ride home. He remembered deciding in that moment that humiliation could either destroy a person or sharpen them into something unstoppable. Standing inside this Beverly Hills showroom now, the memory moved through him like cold steel. Same marble floors. Same carefully hidden prejudice. Same assumptions dressed up as professionalism. Ethan pointed toward the entrance. "I think we are done here." Darius looked up slowly. "Are we?" Ethan gestured sharply toward the glass doors. "You heard me." Naomi immediately stepped forward. "He has not done anything wrong." Ethan turned toward her. "Stay out of this." "No," Naomi said more firmly this time. "I am already in it." The finance manager finally exited his office, sensing the situation collapsing in real time. "What is going on out here?" he asked nervously. Ethan answered quickly before anyone else could speak. "We have a non-client disrupting the showroom." Darius almost smiled at the phrase. "Non-client." The room heard it too. One customer quietly muttered, "Wow," under his breath. The finance manager looked uncertain now, eyes moving between Darius, Naomi, and the increasingly uncomfortable customers filming from different angles. "Sir," he said cautiously to Darius, "maybe we can clarify things privately." Ethan interrupted immediately. "There is nothing to clarify." Then he made the mistake that changed everything. He stepped directly in front of Darius and placed a firm hand against the center of his chest to guide him backward away from the Rolls-Royce display. The movement was not violent, but the meaning behind it hit the room like shattered glass. Naomi gasped instantly. The black woman near the entrance whispered, "There it is." Phones lifted higher now. Darius looked down briefly at Ethan's hand resting against his hoodie. For the first time since entering the dealership, something changed in his face. Not anger. Something colder. Something older. Ethan removed his hand after a second too late, suddenly realizing how the gesture looked with dozens of eyes watching. Darius slowly raised his gaze back toward him. "Funny," he said quietly. "What?" Ethan asked defensively. Darius glanced around the showroom. Different decade. His eyes returned to Ethan. Same fear. Silence swallowed the room completely. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended to look elsewhere anymore. Darius stepped back on his own terms now, straightening the sleeve of his hoodie calmly. "You know the dangerous thing about prejudice?" he continued softly. "People practicing it usually think they are professionals." Ethan laughed nervously. "Oh, please." But his confidence was cracking fast now. The finance manager looked deeply uncomfortable. Trevor stayed hidden near the office hallway. Naomi stood beside the desk with tears threatening to form from pure frustration. Darius looked around the luxury showroom one more time. taking in every polished surface and expensive badge hanging from the walls. "You built this place to impress powerful people," he said quietly. But the second power walked in dressed differently. "You tried to throw it out." Nobody answered him because nobody could. The handprint Ethan left on the front of Darius Coleman's hoodie disappeared within seconds, but the damage inside the showroom stayed hanging in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Nobody was pretending anymore. The customers were watching openly now. Phones remained lifted. Even the employees who had laughed earlier suddenly looked trapped inside a moment growing larger than the dealership itself. Ethan stepped backward, trying to recover control of the room with posture alone. "You are being dramatic," he said sharply. "I barely touched you." Darius looked at him calmly. That is usually how these moments begin. The finance manager rubbed his forehead nervously while glancing toward the glass offices upstairs where dealership executives occasionally monitored sales activity. Naomi Brooks remained beside the reception desk, unable to believe how quickly a luxury showroom had transformed into something that felt painfully familiar. Darius slowly reached into the pocket of his hoodie. Several employees stiffened immediately, their assumptions moving faster than logic. But all he removed was a black smartphone with no visible case or branding. The movement itself felt strangely quiet compared to the tension surrounding it. Ethan folded his arms again. "What now?" Darius unlocked the phone calmly and scrolled once before placing it against his ear. "Vanessa," he said softly. The name meant nothing to most people in the room, but the tone in his voice changed everything. It was no longer observational, no longer patient. It sounded operational, precise. On the other end, Vanessa Reed answered immediately. "I am here." Darius kept his eyes on Ethan. "Activate acquisition protocol." Silence. Then Vanessa replied without hesitation. "Understood. Full authorization." "Full authorization." Ethan laughed nervously. "What is this supposed to be?" Darius ignored him completely. Vanessa's voice remained calm and efficient through the speaker. "Corporate banking has already been notified. Legal is standing by. Vehicle inventory verification will begin in 60 seconds. Naomi's eyes widened instantly. The finance manager looked up sharply. Ethan tried to smile again, but uncertainty was spreading across his face faster now. Darius walked slowly toward the center of the showroom while holding the phone loosely at his side. "Also," he continued quietly, "begin recording all communication connected to this location effective immediately." "Already active," Vanessa answered. "Do you want dealership ownership notified now or after confirmation?" Darius looked around at the showroom employees watching him. "Now." The line disconnected. Nobody spoke for several long seconds afterward. The only sound came from the low hum of the rotating platform beneath the Rolls-Royce Phantom display. Ethan scoffed loudly to break the silence. "Corporate banking?" he repeated mockingly. "What are you pretending to buy the building?" Darius looked directly at him. No pause. Just the inventory. The words landed like a power outage across the room. Naomi covered her mouth slightly. Trevor looked completely pale now. The finance manager stepped forward cautiously. "Sir," he asked carefully, "who exactly are you?" Darius glanced toward him but did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the glass wall overlooking Rodeo Drive, where sunlight reflected across passing Bentleys and Ferraris outside. "That is the interesting part," he said quietly. "Nobody asked until they thought I had money." The finance manager had no response. Ethan shook his head aggressively, trying to force confidence back into the room. "This is ridiculous. Nobody walks into a dealership dressed like that and buys inventory." Darius nodded once. "Exactly." Ethan frowned. "Exactly what?" Darius turned back toward him slowly. "You already decided what wealth should look like." The silence afterward hit harder than the insults earlier because now the room understood the truth beneath everything that had happened. This was never about cars. It was about permission. Who looked powerful enough to belong inside luxury spaces without being questioned? Naomi's tablet suddenly chimed loudly behind the reception desk. She looked down automatically. Her eyes widened. "Incoming corporate verification request. Multiple vehicle VIN authorizations pending." She stared at the screen in disbelief. The finance manager noticed immediately. "What is that?" Naomi swallowed hard. "Somebody just requested verification on 20 vehicles." Trevor whispered, 20. The number moved through the showroom like electricity. Ethan laughed again, but the sound cracked halfway through. "Okay, enough. He pointed toward Darius. This little performance is over. Darius remained completely calm. You still think this is a performance? Ethan stepped closer again, though less confidently this time. I think you are bluffing. Darius nodded slightly, as if he expected that answer. Most people mistake silence for weakness, he said quietly, especially when it comes from a black man standing in an expensive room. The black couple near the entrance exchanged another look, this one heavier than before. Naomi slowly turned the tablet screen toward the finance manager now. Vehicle requests continued populating one after another. Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Aston Martin, Mercedes-Maybach, each marked pending acquisition review. The finance manager's face lost color instantly. Oh my God, he whispered. Ethan noticed the reaction immediately. What? The finance manager looked toward Darius carefully. Sir, are these requests connected to you? Darius slipped his phone back into his hoodie pocket. Yes. Nobody moved. The showroom suddenly felt frozen in place while sunlight poured through the glass walls and reflected across millions of dollars in inventory surrounding them. Ethan stared at the finance manager, then Naomi, then the tablet screen. No, he said quickly. No chance. Naomi looked directly at him. The requests are real. Darius walked slowly back toward the Rolls-Royce Phantom display, his calmness now heavier than intimidation. It felt inevitable. Funny thing about power, he said quietly while running one finger across the polished hood of the Phantom. The people who have the least of it usually talk the loudest. The energy inside the showroom shifted so completely that even the employees could feel it in their breathing. Moments earlier, Darius Coleman had been treated like an inconvenience standing too close to expensive cars. Now every eye in the dealership followed him with the nervous silence people reserve for someone they suddenly realize holds real power. The finance manager stared at Naomi's tablet as additional acquisition requests continued appearing one after another across the screen. 20 luxury vehicles, multiple brands, immediate review status. The numbers alone felt unreal. Ethan Walker shook his head repeatedly like denial itself could stop what was happening. No, he muttered. No chance. Darius stood beside the Rolls-Royce Phantom with one hand resting lightly against the polished hood, calm as ever beneath the white overhead lights. You should have asked questions earlier, he said quietly. Ethan laughed again, but this time nobody joined him. You expect me to believe you are buying 20 cars? Darius looked directly at him. No, Ethan frowned. No what? I expected you to judge me before I ever spoke. The words landed harder than shouting. The black couple near the entrance nodded slowly to themselves. Naomi remained frozen beside the desk, still staring at the acquisition requests updating in real time. Trevor had completely stopped pretending to work now. The finance manager cleared his throat carefully. Sir, he asked Darius, can you explain exactly what this purchase is connected to? Darius slowly turned toward him. Coleman Global Logistics is expanding executive transportation operations across 5 states. The room went silent again. Ethan's face tightened. The finance manager blinked hard. Everybody in Los Angeles knew the name Coleman Global. Shipping, real estate, corporate infrastructure, billions in contracts moving through California ports every year. Trevor whispered under his breath, that Coleman? Darius nodded once. Yes. The showroom seemed to physically shrink around Ethan in that moment. Naomi slowly lowered herself into the chair behind the reception desk because her legs suddenly felt weak. Ethan stared at Darius with growing disbelief. You are Darius Coleman? Darius looked at him steadily. You laughed at a black man in sneakers while standing inside the dealership he was preparing to invest in. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The sentence hit the showroom with the weight of truth finally becoming unavoidable. Ethan opened his mouth once, then again, but words refused to come out now. The customers filming openly no longer even pretended to hide their phones. One man near the Bentley section whispered, "Oh my God." Darius slowly stepped toward the center of the showroom floor while sunlight reflected across millions of dollars in polished metal surrounding him. I came here ready to sign an $8.4 million executive fleet agreement, he said calmly. I wanted to see how your dealership treated people before I trusted you with my company. Ethan's face drained completely. The finance manager looked like he might collapse. Trevor stared at the floor. Naomi's eyes filled with disbelief because she had realized something painful. If Darius had arrived wearing a tailored suit and a luxury watch, none of this would have happened. The entire showroom had exposed itself over clothing and skin color. Darius continued walking slowly past the vehicles, while everyone watched him now the way they should have from the beginning. "You know the interesting thing about prejudice?" he asked quietly. "It makes people confident right before it destroys them." Ethan finally found his voice again. "Mr. Coleman, listen, this whole thing has been a misunderstanding." Darius stopped immediately. The room held its breath. "No," he said calmly. "It was an understanding." Ethan swallowed hard. "I did not know who you were." Darius looked directly into his eyes. "Exactly." The silence afterward was devastating. Naomi lowered her head slightly because the truth behind those words reached deeper than the showroom itself. Darius glanced around the dealership one more time, taking in the expensive architecture, the imported lighting, the employees who had watched humiliation happen in silence until money entered the conversation. "You did not disrespect me because you knew me," he said quietly. "You disrespected me because you thought I was ordinary." The black woman near the entrance wiped at her eye discreetly, while her husband nodded with quiet understanding. The finance manager finally stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Coleman, we can fix this." Darius raised an eyebrow slightly. "Can you?" Nobody answered. His phone buzzed softly inside his hoodie pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen before lifting it to his ear. "Yes, Vanessa." Her voice came through immediately. "Wire confirmations complete. Inventory holds approved. Legal documentation finalized." Ethan stared at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. Darius nodded once. "Good." Vanessa continued. "Do you want the purchase executed?" Darius looked around the showroom one last time. At Ethan. At Trevor. At the finance manager. At Naomi standing alone behind the desk, looking like the only person in the building who still had integrity left. Then he answered calmly enough to freeze the room all over again. "Yes." He lowered the phone slowly and looked directly at Ethan. "I will take all 20 vehicles." Ethan blinked hard. Darius's expression never changed. "Cash." The word cash hit the showroom harder than a slammed door. Nobody reacted immediately because the number attached to 20 luxury vehicles was too large for the room to process all at once. Millions of dollars. Paid outright. The polished dealership that had laughed at Darius Coleman less than 10 minutes earlier now stood frozen around him like a photograph nobody wanted to be trapped inside. Ethan Walker's face had gone completely pale beneath the bright showroom lights. The finance manager looked between Darius and Naomi's tablet screen as additional banking confirmations continued arriving one after another in real time. Wire transfer initiated. Inventory hold approved. Executive acquisition pending release. Trevor whispered something under his breath that nobody fully heard except the word impossible. Darius remained calm in the center of it all. That calmness felt different now. Earlier it had looked patient. Now it looked powerful. "Mr. Coleman," the finance manager said carefully, "we can move to a private office immediately and complete everything properly." Darius glanced toward him. "Properly?" The man swallowed hard. "That is not what I meant." Darius nodded slightly. "I know exactly what you meant." Ethan stepped forward quickly, desperation beginning to replace arrogance. "Listen," he said, forcing a shaky smile. "We clearly got off on the wrong foot." The black couple near the entrance almost laughed at the understatement. Darius looked at Ethan for several silent seconds before answering. "No," he said quietly. "You stood exactly where your character put you." Ethan's mouth tightened. The customers filming openly now captured every second of the exchange. One woman near the Bentley display whispered into her phone. "This man really tried to throw out the guy buying the entire inventory." The showroom buzzed softly with disbelief. Naomi Brooks still stood behind the reception desk, overwhelmed by how quickly the entire balance of power had reversed. Yet even now Darius had not raised his voice once. That part unsettled everyone most. He had dismantled the room without shouting, without threatening anyone, without changing his tone at all. His phone buzzed again. Darius answered calmly. "Go ahead, Vanessa." "Final confirmations are complete," Vanessa Reed said through the speaker. "All 20 vehicles are secured." Corporate legal also reviewed the recorded showroom interactions. Ethan's face tightened instantly at the word recorded. Darius kept his eyes on him. "And?" Vanessa paused briefly. "Ownership has already been notified." Almost on cue, The glass office doors upstairs burst open. Richard Halston, the dealership owner, hurried down the staircase with his suit jacket half-buttoned and his expression filled with panic. Two executives followed closely behind him carrying tablets and paperwork. Every employee straightened immediately. Ethan's confidence disappeared completely. Richard crossed the showroom floor quickly toward Darius. "Mr. Coleman," he said breathlessly, extending both hands. "I am deeply sorry for what happened here today." Darius looked at the offered handshake for a moment before accepting it politely. Richard glanced around the room, immediately reading the atmosphere correctly. Customers filming. Employees silent. Ethan visibly shaken. Naomi standing apart from the others. The truth was obvious. Who handled this interaction? Richard asked quietly, even though he already knew. Nobody answered at first. Then Ethan stepped forward stiffly. "Sir, there was confusion regarding identification," and Richard cut him off immediately. "Enough." The single word dropped through the showroom like a judge's gavel. Ethan stopped talking. Richard turned back toward Darius with visible embarrassment. "This dealership does not represent those values." Darius looked around slowly at the employees who had laughed earlier, the salesman who stayed silent, the finance manager who only became respectful once money appeared. "Actually," he said calmly, "today it represented them perfectly." Nobody moved. Nobody defended themselves because the room knew he was right. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. "Mr. Coleman, I assure you this will be addressed immediately." Darius nodded once. "It should be." Then he looked toward Naomi. She seemed startled when his attention landed on her. "What is your position here?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. "Receptionist." Darius glanced toward Richard. "Interesting." Richard frowned slightly. Darius continued calmly. "She was the only person in this building who treated me like a human being before she knew who I was." Naomi's eyes widened. Trevor looked ashamed. The finance manager quietly stared at the floor. Ethan said nothing at all now. Darius walked slowly toward the reception desk while the entire showroom watched him. "Commission on all 20 vehicles," he said calmly, "goes to Naomi Brooks." Silence exploded across the room. Naomi blinked hard. "What?" Ethan looked physically stunned. The finance manager nearly choked. Richard stared at Darius in disbelief. "Mr. Coleman," Naomi whispered, "that is not necessary." Darius looked at her kindly for the first time since entering the dealership. "Integrity should be expensive," he said quietly. "Otherwise people stop valuing it." Tears filled Naomi's eyes instantly. Ethan looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. 20 luxury vehicles. 20 commissions. Gone. Richard turned slowly toward Ethan with an expression colder than anger. "Turn in your access credentials," he said quietly. Ethan's face collapsed completely. "Sir, please." Richard did not blink. Now, the room remained silent except for the soft hum of showroom lights reflecting across millions of dollars in polished metal. Darius looked around one final time at the dealership that had measured his worth by sneakers and skin color. 10 minutes earlier, they tried to push him out the door. Now the entire building stood still when he spoke. The showroom stood in complete silence as Ethan Walker slowly removed his access badge from his jacket pocket with trembling fingers. 10 minutes earlier, he had laughed at Darius Coleman in front of customers and co-workers like humiliation was part of the dealership experience. Now the same polished floor beneath his expensive shoes felt unstable, almost foreign. Richard Halston took the badge without another word. The sound of the plastic card landing in his palm echoed louder than it should have inside the silent luxury showroom. Nobody looked at Ethan anymore. That was the part that hurt him most. Power had vanished from him so quickly that the room had already emotionally moved on. Darius Coleman remained calm near the reception desk, while Naomi Brooks tried to process what had just happened. 20 commissions. Enough money to change her life completely. Her eyes were still wet with disbelief. "Mr. Coleman," she said softly, "I do not even know what to say." Darius gave her a small nod. "You already said enough when nobody else would." The customers standing around the showroom quietly absorbed every second of the moment. Some still held phones up. Others simply stared in silence at the collapse of arrogance happening in real time. The black couple near the entrance smiled faintly toward Darius before the husband spoke quietly enough for only those nearby to hear. "About time somebody held these places accountable." Richard Halston straightened his jacket and turned toward the remaining employees. His voice carried differently now, less polished. more serious. Every customer who walks into this dealership deserves respect, he said firmly. Not after we see their bank account. Before. Trevor lowered his head immediately. The finance manager looked ashamed. Several salespeople avoided eye contact altogether because deep down they knew they had participated too, even through silence. Darius glanced around the showroom one final time. The luxury cars still gleamed beneath the white lights exactly as they had earlier. The marble floors were still spotless. The expensive scent in the air had not changed. But the atmosphere was completely different now because truth had entered the building and refused to leave quietly. Ethan finally looked up toward Darius again, his voice smaller than before. I made a mistake. Darius studied him for a moment. No, he said calmly. You revealed a habit. The sentence landed like a final lock clicking shut. Ethan had no response left. Richard gestured toward security near the entrance, and Ethan slowly walked toward the glass doors without another word. Nobody stopped him. Nobody defended him. The showroom watched him leave the same way people watch storms pass after realizing the damage has already been done. Once the doors closed behind him, the silence softened slightly. Naomi looked at Darius carefully. Why did you still buy the vehicles after all this? She asked. Several people in the room quietly waited for the answer too. Darius slipped his hands into his hoodie pockets again, returning to the same calm posture he had carried since the moment he walked in. Because businesses do not improve when good people walk away, he said quietly. He glanced toward Naomi. They improve when good people finally have power inside them. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly, overwhelmed again. Richard nodded slowly, as if the statement hit him personally. Darius walked toward the massive glass windows overlooking Rodeo Drive, while sunlight washed across the showroom behind him. Outside, Los Angeles moved exactly the same as before. Luxury cars passed by. Tourists walked sidewalks lined with designer stores. People judged strangers in seconds without knowing their stories. The world had not changed in 10 minutes. But inside this building something had. Darius paused near the exit doors and looked back one final time at the employees, the customers, the expensive showroom that had mistaken calmness for weakness. The most expensive thing in this dealership was never the cars, he said quietly. Every eye remained fixed on him. It was the cost of your assumptions. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The words settled into the room heavier than money ever could. Darius reached for the glass door handle slowly. Before stepping outside, he turned slightly toward Naomi one last time. Do not let this place teach you to ignore your instincts, he said calmly. The world already has enough silent witnesses. Naomi nodded immediately, tears slipping down her face now without embarrassment. Darius gave her a respectful nod in return before stepping out into the California sunlight. The doors closed softly behind him. Inside the showroom, nobody spoke for several long seconds afterward. The customers slowly lowered their phones. Employees stood motionless among millions of dollars in luxury vehicles, suddenly feeling much smaller than they had an hour earlier. Richard looked around the dealership with visible disappointment in his eyes because he understood something now too. The real damage had never been financial. It was moral, and everyone inside had witnessed exactly how quickly prejudice could turn success into humiliation. Outside, Darius walked past the row of luxury vehicles waiting beneath the afternoon sun while traffic rolled steadily down Rodeo Drive. Calm, unshaken, untouched by the noise he left behind. He had not raised his voice once inside that building. He had only raised the standard.